Unmuted, everyone. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? It's so interesting. I went to my daughter's graduation from the school she's been going to today. It's all done on Zoom. And it was everything they talked about, all these people, the students, the teachers, it all had to do with building strength inside themselves to be able to deal with the world that we have to deal with today. It's so interesting about getting training. They do it through business stuff and, about training people for jobs so they can find, work for themselves in the world today. And I listened to this and it was deeply moving to me because it's such a basic need inside people, whether it's to have a spiritual life or whether it's to just function in the corporate world today. People need an inner strength that enables that to do these things without getting crippled, without being taken advantage of by life. And listening, this went on for an hour of all these people, young people talking. And I was deeply moved by it because it was so similar in many ways to what I talk about, except what I talk about is building a chakra system that enables us to live in the world. It enables us to receive God's energy. It enables us to activate Kundalini. It enables us to really to be a point in a triangle that connects spirit with life and enlightenment. I mean, it's amazing. And of course, the sad thing was that all of this is missing in the education of these young people. It's all about developing, business skills, micro, whatever these skills are, and using them in the world so they can support themselves and their families. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. And people really, water finds its, watermark. People operate where they can function in life. But sitting there and listening to all this and saying, there's so many dimensions missing from what people are taught today. There's so many, because nobody's taught where do you get the energy to do all this? Where do you get the energy, to be able to deal with corporate America? Corporate America is like the biggest vampire that exists on the earth. It sucks everybody's energy dry and it repays you with money, Where do you get the energy to deal with all of this stuff that goes? And this is the one thing that is not taught. They're taught about getting stronger, building, getting, the capacity to work in the world and all this stuff, but nothing about where do you get the energy? I mean, where does a car get the energy? It needs oil, it needs gasoline. And a refrigerator needs electricity. Human beings need spirit. They need higher energy to nurture them so they can be able to deal with their life every day without life dealing with them. And it's such an incredible thing that's missing in our world today. And to me, the wonderment of it was, my daughter's gone through, she's number one in her class and she's really done this on, and there's some big corporation that is now interested in hiring her. And, she wants that. It represents financial security and a lot of things. And yesterday she came to me and said, Daddy, if I'm going to do all this, I got to get stronger. Let's meditate. And I was really touched, because we stopped doing it for like 2 or 3 months, and all this other stuff where let's meditate. And so, I mean, it really touched me deeply that at least she recognizes that there's got to be a higher place to go to get this energy. that's going to enable her to deal with her life every day. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask? I mean, I could never stand corporate America. I mean, I once went for a job when I was 19 years old. There was an ad in the New York Times. They were going to train people, to become executives. And I walked into the building and I almost suffocated. I couldn't go even to the interview. The whole thought of doing it was beyond, I know, but that's me, and I'm not everybody, and people have to do what they've got to do with their lives. I don't judge people. But, I mean, whatever you do, I mean, I spent 25 years in the art world, and let me tell you something. You want to be around vampires, all this beautiful art and all this incredible stuff. And beneath it all is just people eating each other alive. It's the same thing. It's the same madness. Business is that, and we need to be strong to do it. You understand? Whether it's working, whether it's running a business, we need to be strong inside to not to allow it to gobble us up. And we need to be strong also to step out of the shadows and embrace life and not live in the shadows of life. And embrace it and open to it and work out our karma and our day-to-day living. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? I must say that I got very strong doing all that bullshit. I really did. I mean, it forced me to go so deep inside to maintain my sanity and to keep from becoming like what these people I used to have to deal with all the time, And I had to go really deep inside and connect with God and get the energy. And it was amazing that way. That way it became like a spiritual teacher for me. It's like, I remember, I always talk about this. I watched an interview with Bill Gates once, and he's talking about, I mean, this blew my socks away, how he can't sleep at night because he's afraid that when he gets up in the morning, his empire will be gone. I mean, there's a guy who's worth $80 billion who can't get a good night's sleep. I mean, it's staggering, it's staggering. And it's like the Buddha talking to you, telling you what's real, what's real in life and what just leads to the grave. Does anybody have a question they would like to?
I would ask you a question, Stuart. Like when it feels challenging for me to really have my attention and like really be focusing on my one point under my navel. I know about the double breath. I just like it was extra struggle for some reason. So if you could speak to that technique, or just maybe it's just a part of the process, some meditations.
Said it, Wendy, it's part of the process. It's just part of learning and training yourself in how to do it. And if you're off and you can't get sent, it's just a reminder that you need to get training in how to do it. And it's part of, I mean, it happened to me for many years. I would try and I used to feel sometimes like I had a cold chisel trying to drill, a tunnel through a mountain, in myself. And I heard Rudy talk about that also. And he said, you get really strong by drilling that tunnel, by staying with it, mastering it, not allowing it to, keep you from, I mean, it's very important to go through all that stuff because there's in us a lot of resistance to growing. There's a lot of resistance to changing. And what you described is a manifestation of that resistance. Suddenly nothing works. I can't get centered. I can't, it's all emotions, mind. And it's just the resistance to growing and changing. And it's like training a wild horse, you know, training ourselves. And so, you know, we have to have the patience and the fortitude to be able to, you know, master this and allow ourselves to learn how to keep the centeredness inside. And to remember that when you go through what you described, it is just resistance to growth. It really is resistance to change, resistance to having a spiritual life.
Mm.
And I think that is something we all go through. Everybody goes through. I mean, even Christ spent 40 days in the night in a desert fighting with the devil, you know? The Buddha went on these deep fasts where he was transforming himself and working through exactly what you described, you know? It's part of the learning process, it's part of the growth process. I've been through it, I don't know how many times, especially early on in my work. What am I doing here? Who needs this? It's crazy. Rudy, da, da, da. And, you know, and then all of it just was a reminder, Stuart, you know, where are you going to go? Where was I going to go? I thought of running away 50 times, 100 times. And I said, where am I going to go? Where am I going to find anybody like Rudy on this planet who's helping me do this with my life? So what you described is just part of the process. It really is. You said it yourself. It's part of the process of learning how to say, you know, I can do this. I can get centered. I can get focused. I just need to work on myself and train myself and condition myself into doing it. It's like learning yoga, you know, you gotta do it. Over time, the body begins to respond to it. It's like learning to play the piano or paint or art or anything, learning to be a doctor, a lawyer. There's resistance, but you got to work through it in order to master the craft of what you're doing. And perhaps the hardest craft to master is just mastering ourselves. Much harder than learning to be a doctor, to master oneself. But we have the tools, we have the breathing technique, and it takes time to be able to not figure it out, but it takes time to be able to organically allow it to become a process inside us that truly enables us to do it.
Thank you, Stuart.
You're welcome. Just keep working. You have a great energy, dear. You really do. And just keep working on yourself. You have an incredible need inside yourself and a hunger for a spiritual life. And don't let these things interfere with it. And if they come, work through them. But you have that. Saw it in the first class you were in, you know, with me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Stuart,
Yes.
I have a difficulty these days. I get very dissatisfied with my progress because I have such an unstable daily life of staying aware of myself. And
Claudia, just ask me a question. Not an essay, okay? Let's kind of simplify this. What is the question? Hello?
I'm here. How can I become more stable in my practice?
All right, you don't have to go any further. You're doing it, Claudia. You're coming to these meditations on a regular basis. You're working on yourself. You look like a completely different person than I knew 3 years ago. You're doing it. Now have patience with yourself and continue to do your inner work. And it comes. You come, you work on yourself, And you got to realize you don't build a pyramid from the top down. It's putting in each brick, each stone. I mean, it took 200 slaves to put in each stone, when they built the pyramids in Egypt, I mean, every step of the way is work. There's resistance. And what am I doing? It's like what I just told Wendy is the same thing you're asking. And you come up against the resistance, and then you have to work through it. And the resistance is not unhealthy. It's just a reminder that you need to get stronger. You need to work through it. You got to open more and take your life a day at a time. And well, if you have a hard day, the hell with it. Everybody has a hard day, I have hard days. I mean, Mercury is going into retrograde, I think, the next day or two.
Saturday, yeah.
It's like a nightmare for me when Mercury goes into retrograde. 3 weeks is like, nothing works. I mean, look, I've had hard days in my life. I've been in airplane crashes. I've been, I mean, look, you want to hear about hard days in your life? I can tell you about hard days, I won't even get into, 80% of them. Some of them were such nightmares that were going on that, I mean, you work through it. And I'll tell you, some of the hardest days I've had in my life made me very strong. Because I had to go so deep in myself. I had to draw upon, Rudy and Nityananda, and it was Ramakrishna and Sarada Devi, Ramana Maharshi, and God knows 100 other teachers. I had to go up in the cosmos screaming, you got to come and give me the energy to get through this.
Thank you, Stuart. And I'm not complaining. I have lots of good moments in time.
Okay, Claudia.
Thank you.
Just keep growing. You're growing. You're doing very well. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Yeah, I have a question. What you talked about with drilling into a mountain really resonated. I feel like I'm just kind of boring down into rock, which I'm kind of all right with, like the breaking down the tension. But I'm wondering, should I be like more going for an uplifting thing? Like people always talk about subtle energies and higher energies. I feel like it's a lot of like digging and that sort of thing.
Well, if you want to, if you're looking for oil, you've got to drill through layers of the earth to get to gushes. You go through layers of yourself to hit that pocket of joy, that real openness, that lightness of being. You get to the other side of yourself. On the other side of all of us is that lightness of being, that joy, that love. But we have to do it. I mean, it's like a fairy tale. Honestly, I said it last time. It's like the knight slaying a dragon to get to the pot of gold. The maiden in distress. What's the maiden in distress? The Shakti that's not being used consciously inside us. It's like a fairy tale. But we have to get through it. And getting through it is how we build the strength. So that if it comes again, we have precedence. We can work through it again. And on the other side of that resistance is always an extraordinary opening. At least it has been that way in my life. And then, you see, the thing is, what happens in life is it doesn't get, like there's a woman in class this afternoon from Norway, does it get easier? I told her no. Oh my God. I said no. She said, oh my God. I said, look, Flora, it doesn't get easier, but you get stronger and you're capable of dealing with it. And the tests get bigger, but you are getting stronger. And the joy becomes more, the love becomes more, the opening becomes more. It doesn't get easier. I didn't see it get any easier for Rudy from the day to day that airplane crash. He was working on himself in such depth that it was a staggering thing for me to be around. But you get joy, you get love. He once told me, Stuart, the one thing they'll never take away from me is the joy in my heart. I remember when he went through that thing with Muktananda and he had to give up everything. He said, the one thing they won't take away from me is the joy and the love in my heart. And I saw him in that, 10 days we were doing, working like I'd never seen anybody work in my life. You can see it in that movie, the Rudy movie, him sitting there and working on himself in such depth. And he told me that. He said, look, the chanting, the shmanting and all that. He said, just get the Shakti, get the energy, get it from Muktananda, get it from me. Don't worry about all this chanting. I remember once I'm sitting in his apartment with him, and this is after Muktananda made us give up everything. We were no longer doing the double breathing exercise. And his students were sitting downstairs chanting. And I said, Rudy, it's 7 o'clock. We got to go. He said, Stuart, let the fanatics chant. I mean, it was like, it was all bullshit to him. It was all bullshit. And he went down and he hit his gong and everybody stopped chanting. And he started, transmitting this unbelievable Shakti and energy that people were absorbing. So, you have to understand that you get to a place where there is a state of ananda. There's a state of openness and sweetness inside, but there's that strength inside that enables you not to stop there, but to go to the next level and the next level in your life. And you get stronger and stronger inside. You can deal with more. You know what I dream of? Somebody that can learn everything I have to learn and maybe not do it the way I do it, but then touch thousands of people, 10 times more people than I can touch. This is what I dream of, finding some people like that, having people like that in my life who are willing to become true vehicles of God's energy and nurture people in a deep and a profound way. And in order to do that, I have to work, I mean, the whole point of having a student is that they become better than the teacher, not to keep them, that they grow and they become more than the teacher. I mean, I remember Rudy telling me we're going to move in the Middle East. Why? Because he was told that there's a great teacher of the Aquarian age who's a young man living in the Middle East. And he was told that he would, find this person and train him. And he kept telling me every time I saw him, are your bags packed? We're moving to the Middle East. And he said, I would rather be the teacher of Christ than Christ, to train somebody to be much more than me, much more than me. Does anyone else have a question? Wow, this really got into serious stuff here, I tell you. Does anyone have a question they would like to, anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Can you hear me, Stuart?
Yeah.
When you're feeling exhaustion and that incredible amount of tension that's like you want to crawl out of your skin, is that resistance as well?
What do you think?
Yeah.
I have to answer that question. If you feel exhaustion, go to sleep, for God's sake. Get a good night's sleep and you'll be okay the next day. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? Okay, all right. But if there are no more questions, there'll be meditation class on Sunday. looking forward to people coming. And again, God bless you all and for dragging all of this stuff out of me. You know, you really do. And I listen also when I talk, and I'm learning. God bless you all. Thank you. And
Thank you.
on Sunday and
Thank you,
Thank you.
Stuart.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sunday.
Stuart.
Sunday.